These is for the Newsies. This video has been made during the 2023 WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes, which are the Writers and Actors Guild strikes against the AMPTP, which is the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, who are refusing to acknowledge and accept their very reasonable demands for fair pay, fair compensation, and employment security. At the time of this recording, neither of the unions have called for a boycott of any kind, so I feel comfortable making it. That said, not everybody seems to be on the same page about what's going on. So I thought that I would let 17-year-old Christian Bale explain it to you, because if you won't listen to the newsboys, then who will you listen to? I also would like to make it clear that despite popular conspiracy theory, this is the only piece of Newsy-related media that exists. If you think that there is any other way for you to engage with a bunch of dirty, dancing teenage boys on strike, then you have Mandela affected yourself into a terribly sad reality. I've never even heard of Broadway. If there was another version of this story, theoretically speaking, it would be blasphemy. That's the disclaimer. On to the video.
Do me a favor, Vbyz. Spot me 50 papes, huh? I got a hot tip on a fourth. Won't waste your money.
This is the best film that has ever been made. There are no better movies. I will not be taking any questions on the matter. I am not kidding. So if I'm not convincing you that this is the best movie that's ever been made, like, what am I doing? I cannot in good conscience encourage you to purchase a subscription to a mouse-related platform that you don't already own. However, I don't feel that anyone should be deprived of this. It's your God-given right to know this film. So I'm gonna give you a rundown of the 1992 Kenny Ortega, Christian Bale, pro-union, pro-strike, tap funk musical, and then I'm gonna walk you through what actually happened. We'll treat it like it's the Hunger Games, and we'll split it up into real and not real, and maybe we'll learn something. Without further ado, part one, the film. Because this is based on a true story and color had not been invented yet in 1899, we appropriately start with everything in like a sepia tone, okay? And one of our newsies is in voiceover, giving us a little rundown, okay? He tells us that in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the streets of New York were echoing with the cries of newsies who stood on the street corners and carried the banner.
Poor orphans and runaways.
Homeless children is what he's talking about. They're homeless children selling newspapers. That is what we are dealing with. So we open on a shot of one of these homeless children sleeping on like a statue in New York City, and we slowly fade into color, which signals to us, the viewers, that we are not in Kansas anymore. We are entering a heightened reality, right? A musical reality. We are about to see the Newsies as we have never seen them before, in color.
But first, I would like to introduce you to our very first sponsor, Sunrise Village. Sunrise Village is a game that takes you on exciting journeys of exploration, farming, and mystery. You can find it on the App Store, Play Store, and now even on your browser. It's like a very peaceful village, beautiful nature. There's water and like boats. Not only do you get to help your grandfather plant all the crops and take care of the cute little animals, there's also a mystery. We've got mystical purple thorny bushes. You get to travel through this world and meet all of these interesting and unique characters and help them with quests. Click my link below or scan this QR code to download Sunrise Village and dive into a world of farming, mystery, and friendships.
We move into what looks like a lodging house because that is what the sign says. We're not going to do the whole film in all this detail, I promise. The opening is just very important, okay? We have to savor it. We're in this lodging house, which is just cramped full of orphaned entrepreneurs in 1899. And there is this kid who is snapping in his sleep. There is free feet, which is wild. And the most iconic first line of anything that's ever been made, "That's my cigar. You'll steal another." Hey bummers, we got work to do. Since when did you become me mother? I stopped you bawling. Hey, who asked you? Do 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 do. So here's the thing. I can quote this entire movie. This is where we meet all of our newsies. We meet our boys, our free-flowing kids. They smoke cigars, they steal, they joke about it, they bang elbows. Bummers, they've got work to do. Work, which is work, is selling papes. Papes are papers. Get with the lingo. There's a lot of lingo. You gotta keep up. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. Okay? There's a lot of lingo and also names. There are some wild ass names you're about to hear. You need to get prepared. If you have no context for this movie, you gotta buckle up because the names are bonkers. You're gonna hear mush, skittery, crutchy, boots. Just hang tight and roll with it. It'll feel natural in a minute. These are homeless children. What the fuck else do they have to do, right? They give each other weird names. They get up, they go and they sell papes. They carry the banner, which is convenient because that is the title of the opening number. Carrying the banner. No G at the end. Carrying the Banner is, like everything else in this movie, the best opening number of anything I've ever seen ever. It introduces us to the entire world, right? All of the problems that they have, the attitude that they have about it, what they do and why they do it. Plus, it is an absolute banger. So who do we meet, right? Who are our little child laborers with these phenomenal names and acrobatic skills dancing through the streets of what is definitely New York City and not at all the universal lot? We start with Racetrack. It's Racetrack. Racetrack is the kid who had his cigar stolen. He is also the kid who gave us the voiceover in the beginning and explained his world. We got Mr. Jack Kelly himself, main man, Christian Bale, Batman pre-puberty. He is our resident leader, dancer, cowboy. They call him Cowboy because he's got this like obsession with Santa Fe. You'll learn about it. He also has a black cowboy hat that he wears like backwards around his neck that you always forget he's wearing until he pulls it up and puts it on. And you're like, where the fuck did you get that hat? Jack Kelly. Jack Kelly interacts with a character called Mush, who doesn't have a picture. Mush asks Jack how he slept, and Jack says, on me back, Mush. Then we also meet Crutchy. Crutchy over here, a kid with a crutch. That's the whole thing. He's hilarious, he's sweet, but also he will knock you the fuck out with that crutch. This is Boots. We've got Boots over here. I didn't put a lot of the Newsies on the board because there's a lot of them, but I did put Boots on because Boots has two of the best lines in the entire movie, and they'll come later, but that's Boots. And we'll get to the rest of them. Newsies. Every morning, they's goes where they wishes. They're as free as fishes, which sure beats washing dishes. It is a fine life carrying the banner through it all. It's capitalism. Capitalism is very fun when you're 9 years old and have nothing else to do with your time. But where there is capitalism, there is competition. And newspaper selling is very competitive. It's a very competitive industry, especially because it's 2 for a penny, and if they take too many, Weasel just makes them eat them after. This is gonna be like that. What they're saying here when they say 2 for a penny, if I take too many, Weasel's just gonna make me eat him after, is that this guy Weasel, whose name is actually YSL, but no one gives a shit, he owns the publishing house that sells the papes every morning to the kids. And they spend 1 penny, they get 2 papes. So they usually will spend 50 cents and get 100 papes and sell 100 papes. Problem is that they can't sell them back if they don't sell them all. So if they only sell 20 papes and they have, 80 left over, they're just like shit out of luck. They can't get their money back. They won't get to eat dinner, so they have to just eat the papes because that's all they've got. And nobody wants to eat newspapers. So you've got to be very strategic about your pape selling and how much you buy, which is what is happening when we get to the yard, right? The publishing house, and we meet David. That's David. David like David and Goliath. David gets in a little spat with Weasel because the one guy can't count to 20 with his shoes on and only gives him 19 papes and not 20 papes. So he gets in a whole thing. Jack steps in, buys him a bunch more papers that he doesn't want because he says the headline's no good because he's a newbie and he has yet to learn that headlines don't sell papes, Newsies sell papes.
Headlines don't sell papes. Newsies sell papes.
There's tension. You got tension. Okay, that's why they're on opposite sides of the striped picture. There's also tension because David has this cute little brother here named Les, and Les thinks Jack is cool as fuck. And so when Jack is like, hey, you want to go sell papes with me? Les is like, hell yeah. And David's like, get the fuck away from my kid brother. But peer pressure is the name of the game here. Everybody tells him that if you learn from Jack, you learn from the best. They go off on a day of pape selling. David's wearing a blue shirt and Jack is wearing a red ascot. Visual signals for us. They've got different styles. Jack lies about the headlines and David's like, don't lie, my father told me not to lie. Jack's like, mine told me not to starve. And it's tension abound. While we're on the visual thing, Jack is the only one who is wearing black, and the only other Newsies that wear black are the bad guys
Crash fire next to immigration building.
Terrify seagulls.
Terrified flight from Inferno!
You know how when Lost came out, there was Flight 29 Down, which was like the kids' version of Lost? The Newsies were like the Flight 29 Down to capitalism. Entrepreneurship gone field day, capitalism for kids. They were like the Barbie car of capitalism, okay? And they're not really getting along until they have to run from the bulls. Bulls is Newsy speak for cops, the law in general, the warden, whatever, who is trying to take him back to the refuge, which is like jail for kids. Jack apparently got caught stealing some food at one point, and he ended up in the refuge because his parents are in Santa Fe looking for the perfect ranch for them all to live on, and once they find it, they're going to send for him, which doesn't sound like a pipe dream at all. But he was parentless at the time of his arrest, so he ended up in the refuge. How did he get out of child jail, you ask? He hitched a ride on the carriage of Teddy Roosevelt. So they're hiding from the law, and they end up in this theater having this very weird interaction with a woman named Meta, who is like a performer there. We get no backstory whatsoever on how Meta knows Jack, except that she was a friend of his father's, so who knows? But we like her. We love Meta. She is one of the only adult characters in this film who is not actively trying to ruin the Newsies' lives, okay? So then who is? Who is trying to ruin the Newsies' lives then? Pulitzer and Heist. They think we're nothing. Are we nothing? No. Joseph Pulitzer, yes, that one, runs the New York World newspaper, which is going to make some incredibly poetic lyricism in like 10 minutes. And William Randolph Hearst runs the New York Journal, I think is what it was called. And those two were like constantly at war with each other. And it's funny now because if you look up Joseph Pulitzer, it says that he like supported labor unions, but like children went on strike against him. He's played by Robert Duvall, who also plays Boo Radley. I think that he must be in other things and he must be like a big well-known actor because everybody talks about him like he's like a big deal, including my freshman year English teacher who played To Kill a Mockingbird and was like, this is Robert Duvall's first ever role. And everyone was like, who's Robert Duvall? And I was like, that's Pulitzer! Robert Duvall. There is no Hearst in the movie, that's why there's no picture of Hearst. They're constantly at war with each other, they're greedy, they're gross, and we don't like them. Look at them, they look like they should be on the Titanic. Well, to be honest, a lot of this movie is very Titanic, only the Titanic is not as good. This is the villain, and he is sat up there with his little minions in his ivory penthouse tower, trying to solve a problem. That problem being that there is a lot of money down there in those streets, boys, and he wants to know how he can get more of it. In a scene that has not aged well given the platform that this movie is currently sitting on, one of Pulitzer's advisors suggests that the best way to make more money for the company is salary cuts, particularly those at the top. An idea that is immediately rejected by Pulitzer. It's a non-starter because this is the bad guy. This is the guy who makes $27 million annually and calls the actors and writers' strikes unreasonable. So the next suggestion on the list is raise the price of the paper, which Pulitzer doesn't want to do because then everybody will just buy a different paper. You can't do that. That's a terrible, dumb idea. And the guy's like, no, not the price for the consumer, but for the distribution apparatus. Charge the Newsies more for their paper. So he does some like A Beautiful Mind style math in his brain and is like, I got it. We raise the price 1/10 of a cent per paper, 10 cents, 100. We can definitely make more money off of the homeless orphaned children in the street because they have so much money to spare. So if they raise the price 10 cents, 100. So if they want 50 papers, they have to spend 60 cents, which when you do the math means that the Newsies have to sell about 10 more papers every day just to make the same amount that they were making before. And it's bad enough that they got to eat what they don't sell. This is why they go on strike. But before we can talk about the strike, we have to talk about Santa Fe. Santa Fe is Jack's solo dance number. He sings too, but it's the dance break that really matters after he has dinner with David's parents and is like, oh, bummer, I don't have parents. I just want to go to Santa Fe where everything's better. And he just runs around the streets and he sings this beautiful song with such heart. And then he stops in the middle and he does this unbelievable dance. And if you don't watch this whole film, please find a clip of that song on YouTube. It's so good and it's so earnest. And Christian Bale really gave his all. And you know what? Maybe if Hearst and Pulitzer had seen the heart and soul and tenacity displayed in that dance break, maybe they would have thought twice about jacking up the price, because boy, oh boy, Mr. Hearst and Pulitzer, have we got news for you. The Newsies are not having it, like not even a little bit. They literally have nothing else to do with their time. Kind of can't believe that anyone ever underestimated a group of bored children who don't have a single adult supervising them. And half of them can even read. They're reading the papers that they're selling, papers that are reporting on labor strikes, and in this movie specifically, trolley strikes. What did they think was gonna happen? I don't know. So they decide that nobody comes through those gates until they put the price back where it was. What, like a strike? Yeah, like a strike. And David's like, we can't go on strike. We don't have a union. And Jack is like, but if we go on strike, then we are a union, which is correct. If the Newsies are the Barbie car of capitalism, the strike is like if you walked outside one day and your 5-year-old was parallel parking. This is exactly how you form a union. Pulitzer and Hearst have to respect the rights of the working boys of New York. They've been hawking headlines, but they're making them today. And you know what? The world will know. Capital W. Get it? The world paper, the world as in the general population. Geniuses. Masterpiece. The World Will Know is the title of the We Are Going on Strike song. It is one of the best songs ever written. It's my second favorite song in the movie. This song has some amazing lines. Crutchy says, and we'll kick their rear, and then everyone says, and the world will know that we've been here. Boots is like, and their name is Mud. And I can't stand blood. Pulitzer may own the world, but he don't know. Pulitzer may own the world, but he don't know. Pulitzer may crack the whip, but he don't whip. Pulitzer may crack the whip, but he won't whip. When you got 100 voices, who can hear a lousy whistle blow? Am I right? Look, okay. The boys are like, we'll do what we gotta do until we break the will of Mighty Bill and Joe. The world is going to see what stop the presses really means. So David, who is the brains of the operation, is basically feeding Jack all of these lines. David is telling him what to say, and then Jack, who is the leader, is like saying it, and then all the Newsies are listening. And Jack's like, okay, we're a union now. We have to start acting like a union. You guys gotta go be ambassadors and get all the other Newsies to join the strike, which is true. But David is like, no, we're not going anywhere until you take our demands to Pulitzer, okay? You get your ass up in that ivory tower, tell him what we fucking want, and then we can move forward. So Jack goes off to do that, and we meet Brian Denton, the only other adult who gives a shit about these kids. He has been watching their dance break, and he's like, what the fuck are all these dancing boys up to? Because Annie doesn't take place for like another 20 years. So dancing orphans are brand new. He's like, what are all you dancing boys up to? And David's like, we're going on strike. And he's like, really? What's your name? He's like, David. And he's like, David and Goliath. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, oh, isn't that poetic and symbolic and metaphoric? And isn't this movie fucking amazing? So that's how they meet. And he's like, I'm gonna report on this. I'm gonna write some papers, and I'm gonna get the word out. So good luck. And he's just in time for Jack to get thrown out of Pulitzer's office by some real hoity-toity type nurse lady, because you can't see Mr. Pulitzer because nobody sees Mr. Pulitzer. Jack tells him not to print any pictures of him. He's like, that's funny. And then they're starving children, so Denton buys them lunch, and then they go to Brooklyn. If the main Newsy set is Titanic, then the Brooklyn Bridge set is Pirates of the Caribbean. In fact, I think that Pirates of the Caribbean was based off of this scene. There's pirate music. They look like they're on a literal ship. There are children swinging from ropes. And there's all this build up to this mysterious Spot Colin, right? Because he makes them a little nervous. He's like a scary dude. They're all kind of stressed out and nervous to meet him. And it just turns out to be this kid. I say just. This was my One Direction, okay? This kid was on my wall. This kid was all over my binders. I was so in love with Spot Colin for so much of my childhood. Hi, I'm in the middle of filming a video. I have to ask you, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when I say Newsies?
What was his name? Scott. Skip. No. What was his name?
Spot Colin.
Yes, Spot Colin. Oh my God. I used to think he was the best thing since sliced bread.
So anyway, so they go to Brooklyn. Boots gets his second incredible line of the movie, which is, Brooklyn, I spent a month there one night. They walk in, Boots presents Spot with like marble shooters, like it's the whiskey and the Prohibition. And they make their case to Spot and they're like, hey, join us on our strike. Spot is not impressed because he thinks that they're gonna run the first minute some goon comes at him with a club. And so he refuses to join, which means the Brooklyn Newsies won't join him. And they're on their own, which is a big letdown. It really lowers the morale of this strike that they started this morning. Heightened reality. Jack and others are kind of snapping at each other because Jack's hot-headed and he feels like it's his fault that the strike is happening and now people are feeling bad about it and he wants everybody to be on his team, but he doesn't know how to communicate because he doesn't have any parents. David is a soft boy, and David knows that the approach that is needed is a slow ballad that steadily picks up till about halfway through and emphasizes the return of morale and reignited motivation towards their initial goals. It's time to seize the day. Seize the Day is a song that if there were somehow a version of this story that was, I don't know, done like on a stage or something, this is a song that they probably would have ruined, and it probably would have been really hard for humanity to survive that. So I'm really glad that we don't have any other versions of this story to deal with. Proud and defiant, they'll slay the giant. They will tap for their lives, these boys will. Motivation restored, the circulation bell starts ringing, but do they hear it? No. So what are they gonna do about it? Soak 'em! And soak 'em they do. Soak means like beat the shit out of someone. Anyway, a few moments of newsy intimidation, and then they're fighting for their fucking lives, and they are in a big, massive newsy fight, and they are winning. But then they gotta scram because it's the Bulls. So everybody runs. Everybody gets the fuck out of there except for Crutchy. Crutchy's not left behind because he's got a crutch. Crutchy's left behind because he is living his best life on this like wagon of newspapers, and he's just having too much fun and he doesn't get up in time. That's the reason, which is just, we love Kenny Ortega. We love Kenny Ortega. Anyway, Crutchy doesn't make it out in time. The evil bad boy Delancey brothers, they grab him, they take his crutch from him, they beat him up, and then he ends up in the refuge. Jack and David try to break Crutchy out by hanging Jack by a rope off the ceiling, but Crutchy's like, I'm not really doing so great and I don't want to be carried out, so just go win the strike. I'll take care of myself. And they're like, oh, but they listen to their friend and they're like, okay. So that's really, really hard on morale. Jack feels responsible for it and everybody is losing faith in the strike, which means that it is time for a reprise. Seize the Day reprise. Seize the Day reprise after Crutchy gets arrested includes this dance move. I love this movie so much. So they reprise, they do this, then they see a bunch of scabs. Scabbers, are people who cross the picket line, right? Now the picket line is both a physical thing when there are literal actual strikers like outside of a building. If you walk through them to the door, you have crossed a picket line and it's real shitty. It's also like a metaphysical, ideological thing. If you are an influencer and you take like a paid gig promoting like a TV show that is currently on strike, you're crossing the picket line, you're scabbing. And that's what those kids who were buying newspapers to sell during the Newsies strike were doing. And they were not fucking having it, so they went in and they go to beat the shit out of them. They go to soak them for Crutchy, but it's a trick. Because the Delancey brothers are awful and they lock them all in and they start like beating the shit out of them back and they're all just soaking each other back and forth and it is looking bleak. But have no fear, Brooklyn is here. Brooklyn comes and saves the day. Spot, Colin, and them, they pop up over the edges of buildings like meerkats and they whip out their slingshots and they help the Newsies and they all come together and they beat the shit out of the scabs and the Delancey brothers and they run away successful, okay? They are having a great time. They are living their best lives. It's so great that Denton is like, I'm gonna take a picture, and Denton takes a picture of them being so happy and he puts it in the paper. Why did I do that? Because Jack told him no pictures, didn't he? Of course that's gonna come back around. This is a perfect movie. Of course that's gonna come back and be important. But first, all of the kids see their picture in the paper. They're like, That is so sick. That is the coolest thing ever. I feel amazing. I feel like $1 million. I feel, one might say, like the King of New York. I don't have much to say about King of New York other than it's good. It's sweet. It's like they're all so excited to be in the paper. They're so excited. And tomorrow they may wrap fishes in it, but they were stars for one whole minute, you know? And they get to just like dream about all the things they'd do if they had money, right? Like a pair of new shoes with matching laces, a permanent box at Cheapset races, a porcelain tub with boiling water, Saturday night with the mayor's daughter, which I also would love. So they tap to their heart's content, and then they decide that they need to keep this momentum going and do something really, really big. Something so big that the rest of the newspapers can't ignore it. So they're like, we should do a rally. That would be great. So they sell out this whole theater. They give these great speeches, including this gem from Mr. Brooklyn himself. I say that what you say is what I say. So many Newsies, they're all living their best lives, and Sarah is there looking so pretty in this dress that defined my personality as a child. According to the behind the scenes video, actually, the dress that she's wearing in this scene is like legitimate, like hardcore vintage, like from 1900 or something like that. And it was so old and delicate that it was like falling apart as she was wearing it. They had people like following her around, like keeping care of it while she was wearing it just for this one scene. She's in like 3 shots. That is the level of commitment that was put into this movie. Like that is the level of love and care that was put into every single thing. I really recommend you watch the behind the scenes. There are 2 parts. They're both on YouTube, thank God. I burnt a hole in our DVD player watching the behind the scenes making of, because it's just so sweet. Everybody was so on board. Everybody committed. Nobody phoned it in, not even for a minute. Not even Christian Bale, who admittedly was like, this is a musical? And like didn't want to be in a musical. They all committed to the bit. Even the background actors, like the background actors are on it. The background Newsies are on it. They even do that thing where when they zoom through the crowd, the person you're closest to, you can hear them singing the loudest. I will never understand why Christian Bale is so embarrassed to have been in Newsies. But I will never fault him, because you know what? He came in, he understood the assignment. They all understood the assignment 100%, and it shows, and it made an incredible movie. That said, he does seem to have made peace with it. I did find an interview of him saying, if you say anything bad about Newsies, you have a lot of people to answer to. And he's right, because he had to answer to those people. Me. Other fun facts from the behind the scenes are that they all pranked Kenny Ortega all the time. They played a lot of basketball, hand slap games. There's also just all these adorable stories of everybody like making everybody feel really comfortable and just like having a good time. I love this movie so much. Back to the rally. The cops show up, because of course they do. Crutchy, who's in the refuge, right? He sees a picture of Jack in the newspaper, and he's like, oh, that's Jack. And the warden's like, who? And so he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And, totally covers for him. But he's like, hey, that kid is going by the name of Jack Kelly. Now I can go get his ass. So Warden Snyder, which is this asshole, he goes to the rally to arrest Jack Kelly, and a fight breaks out, which is awful, and a bunch of Newsies get arrested, which leads to this hilarious court scene. I object. On what grounds? On the grounds of Brooklyn. Thankfully, though, Denton is there, and Denton pays all of their fines. Well, except for one. He's not able to pay Jack's fine because Jack is not Jack at all. Oh, this is where we learn Jack's backstory. We learn that Jack Kelly is not Jack Kelly at all. His name is Francis Sullivan. His parents are not out west looking for a ranch for him. His dad is a convict and was arrested and is in prison, and his mom is dead. And he's just been living a lie because he's sad and doesn't have anyone to take care of him. Santa Fe was just a dream. It was escapism. Jack was running from his trauma, guys. Running from his trauma. So the rally backfires, like majorly. Almost everyone gets arrested, and Pulitzer, douchebag, puts a printing ban on all strike-related matters, basically saying that no newspapers can print anything about the Newsies strike. Right? So Denton, who wrote this whole paper, can't print it, and he has to go to the restaurant and tell all of the Newsies that he can't print the paper that they wrote, and that he also is being shipped off to like West Angola or something. He's going off to be a war correspondent somewhere. So it's very sad, and the Newsies, they feel abandoned by their surrogate father figure. So David is like, we can only trust the Newsies, and David feels like he can't be a leader without Jack, right? Because David was just the mouth, he wasn't the microphone. So he decides they're gonna break Jack out tonight. They're gonna go and they're gonna break him out of prison, because that's what Jack would do. Jack tried to break Crushy out. He's gonna be Jack, he's gonna break Jack out of jail so then they can win. But they get there and they break him out successfully, but then they get in a fight because Jack's like, what the fuck are you doing trying to break me out of prison? You could get arrested for this, and what is your family gonna do? And David's like, it's what you would have done, pretty much. And Jack's like, I can do that because I don't have a family looking out for me. I don't have mouths to feed. The only reason that David and Les are selling papes is because David's dad got injured at work and lost his job at the factory because he didn't have a union to protect him. And so they had to quit school and sell papes to support their family. Jack is rightfully like, you gotta be smarter. You can't be as dumb as me. You gotta be smart and you gotta protect your family. They have this fight once and then they also have it again the next day because Jack starts scabbing. Jack is a survivor. He had to do what he had to do. Pulitzer offered him a lot of money to sell papes for him because he was like, if you do it, the strike will fall apart. So Jack took it. He gets a new suit. He gets money in his pockets, real money. And he's like, I'm going to just save up money. I'm going to go to Santa Fe and leave. I'm going to be on my own because I've always been on my own. And that's how it works. This is heartbreaking for David and the rest of the Newsies because now it's up to them, right? They don't have their main leader. What are they gonna do? But we find out pretty quickly that there's one thing that Jack can't do, and that's be something that he ain't. And David's like, what, be a scab? And Jack's like, no, be smart. Because Jack immediately comes to their defense when they get in some trouble, and he, gives up his fancy suit to join the strike brigade again. So they find a copy of Denton's article, because Denton did print at least one paper of it, and he gave it to David to read. David was too sad to read it at the time. Les wrapped a hot dog in it, and then Sarah, his sister, who you don't have to remember, we always forget about her till the end anyway, she found it, then they read it, and so they go to Denton's house in the middle of the night, and they're like, did you mean what you wrote about all these sweatshop kids listening to me? Denton's like, I don't write anything I don't mean. He's like, well, we got to do something. We got to print our own paper, and we got to get all the Newsies together. We got to do another rally that's so big that they can't ignore it a second time. Denton's like, that's a great idea, because here's the thing. David's got the brain, Jack's got the mouth, but David knows how to print a paper. We come together. They all come together and they're like, we need a printing press. Where are they going to find a printing press? Well, I forgot to tell you that Jack, when he took that deal with Pulitzer, was given room and board in the publishing house. The publishing house for Joseph Pulitzer. So they break in kind of to Pulitzer's printing press and they print their own paper to the best song in the film. It's called Once and For All, and it's so good. They print their own paper and then they just go around the city and they hand it to any working child laborer, sweatshop, homeless kid they find. And they're like, can you read? Read this. Can you read? Read this. They give these papers to everybody. They just tell them, show up at this time tomorrow. And they show up the next day outside of Pulitzer's office and nobody's there. And they're real sad about it. And they don't know what to do. And Les is like, when the circulation bells start ringing, will we hear it? And Racetrack's like, nah. And they have this really sweet moment where they like kind of reprise The World Will Know in like slow, sad ballad version. And then they hear a rumbling in the distance. And it is like a zillion people barreling down the street because everybody has come to support the Newsies. Everybody read what they wrote. Everybody in the city comes out to support the Newsies and stand outside of Pulitzer's office and yell. Jack and David, they go up to Pulitzer and Pulitzer's like, I told told you not to write this. And he's like, and you listen to me. And Jack's like, no, you listen to me. And he's like, and you listen to me. And he's like, no, you should listen. There's a lot of people out there and they got voices now and they're not going away. They fight and they scream. And then the one guy's like, those kids put out a pretty good paper there, boss. And he reads the paper and he's like, whose press did you use to print this? Whose? And Jack's like, we only use the best. And they have this whole moment and then the scene changes. And suddenly Jack's walking out. What happened? What was the result of the meeting? And Jack whispers something in Les's ear and puts Les on his shoulders. And then he stands up and he goes, we beat them. Headlines don't sell papes. Newsies sell papes. And they beat Pulitzer. And they put the price back where it was. Child laborers prevail. And that, my friends, is a true fucking story.
Once and for all, something tells me the tide will be turning. Once and for all, there's a fire inside me that won't stop burning. Now that the choices are clear, now that tomorrow is here, watch how the mighty will fall for once and for all. This is for kids shining shoes in the street with no shoes on their feet every day. This is for guys sweating blood in the shops where their bosses and cops look away.
Part 2. Reality.
This is over, you want the rifle tonight. It's the night that you can't. Just get this done, and by dawn's early light you can finish the fight you began.
As with all things in life, the story of the Newsboy strike of 1899 exists on a spectrum. There's the reality and there's the movie. We're gonna go along this and we are gonna place the different things that we've talked about somewhere on this spectrum versus what really happened that is accurate in the movie and what did they change in order to make the perfect film. First things first, what in God's name is a newsboy?
God's not dead, he's surely alive, he's living.
Newsboys, also known as Newsies, were children, mostly orphans, that came along in like the late 19th century with the rise of sort of mass printing and circulation of news and news pamphlets. According to the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History, they were wretchedly poor, homeless children who often shrieked the headlines well into the night and often slept on the street. In 1872, James B. McCabe described them as part of the army of 10,000 homeless children in New York. So homeless children and child labor was a problem, and the Newsies were a very real part of it. This is not from the strike, this is from much later. But you will also notice, girl. There were newsgirls. There were newsgirls that did not really exist in the movie, so separate them slightly because they weren't included in the film. Female newsies, newsgirls, newsy girls were actually like a big problem for the Newsies during the strike because this strike was violent. And so there are all these newspaper reports where the kids are talking about the problem of what to do with the ladies because a fella can't soak a lady. They have meetings about it, trying to figure out like how do they deal with girl newsy scabs because the girl, they would hide their newspapers under their skirts and then they would go and sell them where the striking newsies couldn't see. And so they were like, they're real sneaky, except there was one newsie named Annie. All the boys were like, she ain't got nothing up her skirts. They were like, we know Annie. Annie's a real one. Annie would not be out there scabbing and she would beat the living shit out of anybody who came her way. So there were definitely a lot of like badass like news girls as well. The kid who gave that quote actually that said a fella can't soak a lady is actually a kid named Kid Blink, and he was the inspiration for Jack Kelly. Jack Kelly will put like here because Jack Kelly himself is not real, but he is based off of a kid named Kid Blink, who we do have a newspaper drawing from the time period of the strike. It says Kid Blink before the strike. He was called Kid Blink because he had one eye. He was also known as Red Blink and Muggsy McGee and Blind Diamond because he was blind in one eye. His real name was Louis Belletti, and he really was a very strong figure in the strike. Was very loud. He gave a lot of interviews. He was a big leader in the strike. I guess they didn't want to deprive us of those eyes. They didn't give him an eye patch, but there is a kid named Blink in the film. Other real people. Where's David? David! David was also a real newsie. And we actually have like a legitimate photograph of the real David that he was based on. And I printed it out and now I can't find it, which is frustrating, but I'll put it on the screen. David, based on a real kid named David Simons. And the real David was 21 at the time of the strike, but he was one of the union leaders. Crutchy is also real. I couldn't find his first name, but they called him Crutchy Morris. He's cited in newspapers. He was a real kid. He apparently only had one leg, whereas our Crutchy just has some kind of disability. This is not real Crutchy. This is from like 1912. This is just a newsboy with a crutch, but there was a kid named Mush. His name was Young Myers, and he was called Young Mush on account of his fondness for taking his girl to the park on Sunday evenings. Other actual real Newsies names that were cited in newspaper articles at the time include Kid Fish, Grin Boyle, Henry Major Butts Butler, Thimble Finger, Joe Mulligan, Juicy Frank Glass, Donato Carlucci, aka Musty Pip, Young Warhorse Brennan, Bob the Indian, Little Mikey, who was the orator, Young Monix. There's also this just like eccentric German lady who hangs out at Brooklyn Bridge selling papers and just screams, and they call her Miss Crybaby, as well as Annie Kelly, who is the news girl that we talked about earlier, who was a badass. We also have Skabooch, Black Diamond, not Blind Diamond, different Diamond, and a kid named Crazy Arborn. But they make it very clear to the reporters, Crazy ain't no newsboy. He sells pretzels and other dope to us for coin. And he gave them a bunch of free pretzels one day, so they put him on the strike committee. The other day, he donated free gratis 1,500 pretzels to keep us from starving, and we elects a member of the union and a member of the strike committee for his services. Lodging houses were real. They were created and invented because there were so many homeless children on the streets of New York, and most of them were runaways and orphans or kids who just didn't have anyone to look after them, but they did not trust the authorities or the churches because the systems that were set up traditionally would either send them to jail, right? Send them to the refuge, send them to very unsavory sort of orphanage situations, housing situations. They were not safe and they weren't environments that anyone wanted to go back to. So the kids would sleep on the streets instead. And the lodging houses specifically were invented to give these kids a safe place to go without any strings or rules attached. So whereas if you went to like an orphanage or shelter, there would be curfews, they would force you to go to church or school, there would be rules about whether or not you could go work or whatever. So they would avoid them. They wouldn't go there because they wanted to go out every day and sell papes because capitalism is very exciting when you're 9. The lodging houses basically were like dirt cheap and no questions asked, basically. As long as you weren't starting fights and getting into legitimate trouble, you could pay 6 cents, have a meal, a place to sleep, and take a bath. They weren't free, but they were still very charitable. They would not really turn anyone away who couldn't pay. It would just be like a loan system. They were not exclusively for, but were exclusively for working kids. The biggest appeal above all of these lodging houses was that you were allowed to work. Go out, you could sell papes, you could carry the banner. Except that's not what carrying the banner means. I was really sad to find this out too. Carrying the banner refers to, in a strike or a parade, when you hold the banner, you just walk the streets, you stay in front, you don't go in places, or you don't come in and out of the parade or the march or the strike or whatever. That term was used sort of jokingly to refer to sleeping on the streets. When someone asked you, like, what have you been up to? And they said carrying the banner, they were not talking about proudly dancing down the streets and selling papes. They were talking about this. Because the idea was you didn't have anywhere to go or stop. You just walked the streets all night. You were carrying the banner. Boots was probably not real. I couldn't find anyone named Boots, which is very sad. Another heartbreaking falsehood in the Newsy film is my man Spot Colin. It's a great name though. The head of the Brooklyn Newsies was actually not at all difficult to get on board with the strike. He was actually super, super involved with the strike. In fact, he was Racetrack. Ed Racetrack Higgins was a very well-known newsie. Like Racetrack in the film, he spent a lot of time at Sheepshead Bay racetracks. He was also very charismatic. He was a really interesting dude. He was a really good speaker. We know this because the rally is also real. It really was at the Irving Theater. They absolutely sold it out. They sold out the whole place. There were 5,000 Newsies showed up from all over the city and from Jersey. They had like 2,000 Newsies waiting outside on the streets. It was so bad that the cops just gave up. They didn't know what to do. They had so much support at this rally. And Racetrack gave a speech that was so good. The newspapers reported, they were like, if they had been voting for offices that night, Racetrack Higgins could have had any office that he wanted. So he's very charismatic, very good speaker at this rally that they had, which gonna get put somewhere in the middle because it was at the same place. It was accurately packed, but in the movie, they all get like arrested and it's sad and there's like a fight that breaks out and it's really ineffective. Whereas in reality, it was super effective. It did exactly what they needed to do. It was very safe and it was actually supported by like local business people. There were local businessmen, local politicians, pretty much everybody except for Pulitzer was on the side of the Newsies. That's a big difference. Pulitzer's real and the World was a real paper, but as far as like the general public and the outside world's perception of the strike, most people were very on board. There were a lot of adult speakers at the rally who were just complimenting them on, you know, their tenacity and were very impressed by what they were doing. It was a very, very successful event and it ended safely. In the movie, they make it seem like they were not selling any papers whatsoever, that they were completely striking against newspaper selling in general. In reality, they were only striking against the World and the Journal, because those were the only papers that raised their price. So they were happy to sell like the Telegraph and the Sun. And the Sun did actually write a lot about the strike. There was a lot of coverage on it. But the other papers were happy to report on the strike. They were happy to report on the rally because they wanted to keep the newsboys happy, because the newsboys were working really hard to convince people to buy alternative papers and not buy the World and the Journal in order to make their strike effective. And like, let's be honest, these are dirty homeless children without shoes. The least you can do is not buy the newspaper that they are asking you not to buy, right? If you're not going to buy them dinner, you can at least buy a different newspaper. Also, they fully did soak and beat the shit out of anybody who didn't conform. It was very violent. The movie does not do the level of violence justice. They beat up grown men. They terrified police officers. The World and the Journal would give Newsies police escorts to go sell their papers. They're like scabs. They would pay them $2 and then they would hire like cops to go stand there and keep them safe. And the kids would send one kid up to take a pape from the scab and run off so that the cop would chase that kid. And then 4 other kids would come out around the corner and beat the shit out of the scab. They were so far ahead of the game. They were so much smarter than anyone ever gave them credit for. And they really came out of nowhere. Guns a-blazing, balls to the wall, did not play around. And it served them very well. They got arrested all the time. The scene in the movie where they get given like a $5 fine, pretty accurate. There were a bunch of newspaper articles where they were fined $5 that they couldn't pay, so they'd go to the refuge and break out, or someone would pay it for them because they had a lot of wealthy supporters of the strike. There is a story from the Sun from July 23rd, 1899, 2, 3, maybe 4 days into the strike. I think it was like the 21st it started. At 10 o'clock, an extremely candid man, a little worse for liquor and wear, rolled into the Sun office. "I'm a Bowery bum," he said, "and one of about 100 that's signed to take out Worlds and Journals tomorrow. But say, we ain't gonna do it. It's all a bluff. We told them scouts that we'd do it when they offered $2 a day, but every one of us has decided to stick by the newsboys and we won't sell no papers. Put that in the plate and tell the public it's on the level." July 23rd, 1899. And there are like a bunch of reports of this. Instead of just saying no, they all agreed to show up. 75 men went to the World office. They listened to a guy talk shit about the strike, stood up, and 68 of them walked out, literally laughing at the man who was propositioning them this. The other biggest thing that is absolutely accurate about the movie is that they won. They beat them. They did do it. They did do it successfully. They did not beat them the way that they did in the movie, though. The film is accurate in the amount of money that the Newsies paid for the papes. They did pay 50 cents 100, and the price raise was from 50 to 60 cents. It was 1/10 of a cent. In the speech that Kid Blink gave at the rally on July 24th, 1899, he said, "Ain't that 10 cents worth as much to us as it is to Hearst and Pulitzer, who are millionaires? Well, I guess it is. If they can't spare it, how can we?" And the crowd yells, "Soak 'em." And then Kid Blink says, "Soak nothing. I'm telling the truth. I'm trying to figure out how 10 cents on 100 papers can mean more to a millionaire than it does to a newsboy. And I can't see it. We can do more with 10 cents than he can with 25, any way we wants it. And we'll strike and we'll restrike until we get it. Won't we, boys?" Fun fact, this speech was so good that Kid Blink got a ring of flowers at the end of the night for giving the best speech. Because these are still literal children. So they don't drop the price back to where it was. But they do, at the end of the 2-week strike, allow the Newsies to sell back unsold papers. So if you bought 100 papes and you could only sell 80, you can go back and get your 10 cents back for the papers that you didn't sell, which was just as good, if not better, than putting the price back where it was, because they were no longer operating at a loss, and these kids could at least keep all of the money that was rightfully theirs. And overall, the strike was very successful. It was not the first time that the Newsies had been on strike. There had been smaller strikes over the years, especially against the world. Spoiler alert, not great dudes, the Pulitzers. But this strike was bigger and more effective than any have had in the past. It spread across the country. I ran out of storage, minor angle change. But the point is, the Newsies strike of 1899 was a group of children, kids, people who the world forgot about, who still, with barely any education, no supervision, no money, no food, barely places to sleep, these kids organized a union, the Newsboys Union. They called themselves a union. They had a union committee. They had 4 boys that went in, and they went into negotiations with Pulitzer and Hearst. They got laughed out of the room with a pat on the head, and then these kids turned around and they were like, "We're not playing. You're wrong and we're right, and also we're willing to beat the shit out of anyone who doesn't agree." They cut the circulation of the New York World from 360,000 papers a day to 125,000 papers a day practically overnight. They negotiated. They went in. They took this incredibly seriously. They were very respected. What was his name? Like Jack Sullivan or something like that? What is this? Kid Blink tells the Sun, "We've got the Uptown boys, the Long Island City boys, and the Brooklyn boys all with us. And if the papers can stand it, we can." I was talking with a man this morning who tells me that the World and Journal advertisers is a kicking about putting up ads in a paper that ain't got no circulation. If we can get the advertisers with us, we win in a walk. Anyway, we are going to hold out. They didn't just stop selling the papers. They went after the advertisers. They put out their own circulators, their own like little papers like they do in the movie, their own little newsy paper, telling people their demands, telling people not to buy the World and the Journal, inviting other newsies to join them. And they had the people who were working at the printing presses working all day and all night to get these out overnight for free for these kids because they supported these kids. They didn't use Pulitzer's press, but they did take prints that were about like a Brooklyn car strike for a different company situation that said strikers remain standing or strikers hold out, strikers stay strong, something like that. They cut out the part about the car parts and they taped them to their signs and they walked out in the streets with them. And so that is kind of true. The Newsies strike is amazing, and it's even better in real life than it was in the best movie ever made. There's a quote from a really great summary article from SHU that says, "They were not intimidated by others, especially older businessmen. The Newsies carried their banners and picket signs across the city proudly instead of being playful, quiet young boys. They were a group that people did not expect to rise up and strike due to their poor living conditions and their age. The strike itself itself strengthened the notion that the youths had power and control over their future and reinforced to the public that they were a significant part of the population too. I keep running out of storage, so I have to wrap this up. We won't get child labor laws even brought onto the table for consideration until 1916, and even then, those are going to get overturned and thrown out over and over again. It's not gonna be until like well past the 60s that people really stop hiring children. The Newsies strike didn't change the world. It didn't fix the problems, but it did make their lives better. It did assert their independence. It did give them a couple extra pennies in their pocket. And it's really inspiring. And the movie was really inspiring. I was watching this with a friend of mine. I finally convinced her to watch it. I try to get people to watch this movie all the time. I try to get everyone in my life to watch it. And so far, only one person has listened to me and they loved it. We got about like 20 minutes in and she was like, oh, I can see why you're like this. I love this movie. It brings me so much joy. And I hope that I can bring you some joy with it. I know that this video is not the caliber of my other content, but here's the thing. I, like the Newsies, am also out here entrepreneuring, dreaming of a porcelain tub with boiling water and a Saturday night with the Mayas Dora. I'm so out of space. I have like 2 minutes I can film left. The big 3-hour philosophy monsters are going to keep coming, but they take 6 to 8 months. So in the meantime, I'm gonna try and make a lot more content that is, I don't wanna say low effort, but less labor intensive. We're gonna try and put some more stuff out there and see what else I can do, because I like editing and I like filming and I would love to like get better at it. And I don't know what I'm doing here. We're rolling with it. We're gonna figure it out. The sources that I did use for this video will all be on my Patreon, never behind a paywall. Sources are never behind a paywall. There's also no like tier system. You get the same thing for paying $3 that you do for $100. Don't pay $100 for my Patreon. It's not worth it, I promise. Also, because incentives are fun, I have decided to throw out some wacky incentives. If I ever hit 100,000 subscribers, I will do the Twilight video that people have been commenting about. It'll probably be 5 hours, if not more. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed learning about the Newsboys, and I hope you are prepared for this period of experimentation with the content, capital C content. If you're not, just ignore them. There will be a big philosophy video in a couple months. You can like the video if you like it, subscribe if you want. Let me know what you would like me to make content about. You can find me, it's up in your biz on all the things. Support the actors and the writers' strike, and drink a glass of water. Okay. Seize the day, my pals. Seize the day.
5,000 fists in the sky, 5,000 reasons to try. Going over the wall, either we stand or we fall. Better to die than to crawl, for once and for all. It's a bop.